governments are the ones in the best position to finance it. But in fact, the CEOs of many corporations have also pledged to fight AIDS, and there have been some interesting contributions made by, for example, the pharmaceutical industry, which is interested in trying to help people get affordable drugs in poor countries. But the US government, for example, has made generous pledges. Not all the money they've pledged has come through, and certainly we'd like to see more of it come.
Why do you think that's such a challenge in collecting on those pledges?
Well, look, every government has its own priorities, and every government knows that the population of their own country is their first priority, and we understand that. I mean, charity always begins at home, and no one's going to say that it's wrong to first tend to your problems at home. But we believe at the UN that everybody, however poor, has something left over to give people outside their home.
And why do you think that's important?
It's important, first of all, in the name of our common humanity. You know, we are really all human beings with the same needs, the same desires. And because human security isn't really divisible, I don't really believe that we're going to be secure and safe in one corner of a village or a town when people are suffering or starving or dying in another corner that we pass by every day, metaphorically, at least on our television screens, literally. And so you're looking at a situation in which, just as you wouldn't tolerate that in a village, you can't tolerate that in our global village.
Do you believe in service above self?
That's the Rotary motto, and yes. It's extremely important, I think, that we try and encourage the notion of service. I mean, I think service before self is wonderful and wonderfully idealistic, but sometimes I'm prepared to say, go ahead and look after the self, but also provide the service.
Why do you think peace is so difficult? Why can't we just all get along?
Rodney King, yeah. Well, sometimes people say it may be human nature, but people tend, unfortunately, for good reason or bad, and usually the reasons are bad, to find themselves in conflict with other people. I mean, this has sadly been the pattern of all human history, and perhaps at bottom we can't change human nature. What we can do is, of course, try and moderate human nature by removing the incentives for conflict and removing the opportunities for conflict. In other words, just as human societies through civilization have ordered themselves in such a way that every time people go out in their daily business, they're not coming into clash with each other. There are traffic lights, everyone isn't trying to horn in everybody else's driving space, or there are cops on the beat so that people can't just come and relieve you of your wallet, and so on and so forth. Similarly, that at the global level, we need to think in terms of how to organize ourselves and order ourselves so people minimize the number of occasions where they might actually need to clash with each other. And if we can get to that, which I believe we can, what the UN's trying to do is to promote international rules of the road, the rule of law, which is something you take for granted in America. You need the rule of law internationally as well. I'm not talking about world government. I'm not saying that somebody in New York wants to sit here and rule the world. Far from it. What I'm saying is that sovereign governments around the world need rules under which they can cooperate with each other. Because basically, we have a common set of objectives. Kofi Annan has often talked about the problems without passports, the kind of problems without passports. You know, the problems that cross all frontiers uninvited, problems that no one country or no one group of countries is powerful enough to solve on their own. Problems of weapons of mass destruction, of environmental degradation, of terrorism, of drug abuse and drug trafficking, of money laundering and international crime, and of course of poverty, as well as of refugee flows, issues of human rights. These are all problems that aren't contained behind the borders of one country. They can't be solved by people of one country, and they don't just affect people of one country. These are problems that don't need passports to travel. They actually affect everybody in the world, and the UN's hope is that we can use these international mechanisms of cooperation to deal with these problems around the world.
If you had a magic wand that you could wave, what would be your 3 wishes for the United Nations?
Well, I'd say the first thing is probably to give us the magic capacity to end HIV/AIDS. I think that it's not just a horrible disease that's taking lives every day, it's also undermining development in countries that seemed to be pulling themselves out of poverty and misery, and suddenly find some of their best educated minds disappearing because of HIV/AIDS. A second, in a more positive sense, would be to give us, with that magic wand, the ability to educate girls everywhere in the world. And I say girls because obviously we're in favor of universal education. We know that that's going to to take a while to get there. But if we can educate every girl in the world, we'll transform the world for the better. There is no question about it. You educate a boy, you educate a person. You educate a girl, you educate a family, you educate a community. And the way in which so many studies and statistics by the World Bank, by academic institutions, have shown that when girls are educated, it changes everything. It changes the way in which they look after their own health. It changes the way in which they marry and have a sense of themselves. It changes the way in which they reproduce. It changes the way in which they look after their children, and so on and so forth. So, if you had to pick one thing in the wish list of things we like to have, girls' education would have to be it. And the third thing I'd like, frankly, is for people to understand and appreciate the UN more. The fact is that we find ourselves very often blamed and criticized for things we haven't done wrong, told off because we are either seen as the place where a bunch of foreigners get together and try and tell America what to do, which is not what the UN's about, but that's often the caricature of the UN, or it's characterized or caricatured as a talking shop full of people making speeches, or people generating vast quantities of paper not doing anything. All of these are caricatures that are far removed from the truth. The UN is an organization that goes out in the front lines and tries to work for a better world with real people everywhere. And I'd like the good people of America watching your show to understand that side of the UN too.
Well, Shashi, I think you hit on a very important note, and that is how and why it's important to understand the real inner workings of the United Nations and the work that it does outside of issues such as Iraq. So stay tuned for more with Miami's Global Connection after this break.
I wish I could go back when I didn't need someone to do my hair, back when I could still say my husband's name, back when I could have called 911 but didn't, back when I first felt the warning signs of a stroke but did nothing. I wish I could go back, but I can't.
With a stroke, time lost is brain lost. At the first warning signs, take action immediately.
Hi, I'm Whitney Belker, and welcome back to Miami's Global Connection. Shashi, we were talking about one of your top 3 wish list for the UN. One of them was there is a lack of understanding of the United Nations. What would you like to do to improve that?
Well, I think I'd like to get the word out a little more in this country. I mean, the fact is that there are some people who don't like the UN, just as they didn't like the League of Nations, and some people who just don't feel that there is any need to work with foreigners and with the rest of the world. And I think that's a great pity, because of course you can't stop the earth spinning and offer to get off. I mean, basically the US is a part of the globe and needs to work with the rest of the globe. And those people, I guess, we never will reach. In fact, there's an old Indian proverb that you can't wake a man who's pretending to sleep. If somebody doesn't want to hear you trying to rouse him, he's not going to wake up. He's not going to be facing the music, as it were. And so those people we won't reach. But the vast majority of Americans are people who either know a little bit about the UN and sort of say they like it because it seems to be standing for the right sorts of things like motherhood and apple pie, or the even larger number of people who perhaps are essentially ignorant about it and don't have a strong opinion one way or the other, but are susceptible to the kind of caricaturing that you see sometimes in the media of the UN. Those are the people we'd like to reach, and we'd like to say to them, come and look at the kind of things we're doing, why we're doing it, and why it's so important to have these things done.